The wind carved icicles into cruel, glittering teeth on the skeletal branches of cottonwoods. It screamed across the barren plains, a sound like a banshee weeping for lost souls. Alara huddled deeper into the flimsy shelter of the half-collapsed cabin, the biting cold seeping through the gaps in the logs and the thin soles of her worn boots. Days had blurred into a single, agonizing stretch of hunger and fear since the wagon broke and Thomas left, promising to fetch help that never came. He'd taken the horse, the rifle, most of the supplies, left her with a broken wheel, a meager blanket, and the knowledge that the nearest settlement was leagues away through unforgiving territory. Despair was a physical weight in her chest, pressing the air from her lungs. Every crackle of ice, every groan of the wind, sounded like a threat. She was alone, vulnerable, adrift in a world that had suddenly turned its back. Her fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the tattered edge of the blanket, a useless shield against the encroaching freeze. She had tried to fix the wagon, to walk, to signal, but the blizzard had descended with a ferocity that pinned her here, a prisoner of the elements. Tears froze on her cheeks, leaving stiff tracks like glacial scars. She was a cowgirl by necessity, hardened by sun and dust, but nothing had prepared her for this profound, bone-deep isolation. The cabin offered little protection, merely a slight interruption in the wind's fury. There was no fuel for a fire, only damp, frozen wood. Hunger gnawed relentlessly, a constant, aching reminder of her plight. She closed her eyes, picturing green fields, a warm hearth, the simple security of a life she had left behind. But the vision was faint, overwhelmed by the stark white and gray reality of her present. It was in this state of utter hopelessness, her spirit feeling brittle as the ice outside, that she first saw him, a figure against the swirling snow, moving with an unnerving silence, like a wraith. He was tall, cloaked in hides that blended with the landscape, carrying a long rifle with the ease of long practice. He stopped some distance away, a dark, still shape against the white chaos, observing the derelict cabin, observing her. Fear, sharp and primal, pierced through her despair. She didn't know him. He wasn't Thomas. He was just there, an unknown variable in her desperate equation for survival. She remained motionless, barely breathing, watching him through a crack in the wall. His face was indistinct in the gloom and swirling snow, but the posture was one of guarded assessment, of a man who belonged to the wild, not the settled world she knew. He didn't call out, didn't approach directly. He simply stood, observing, a silent, unsettling presence that promised neither rescue nor immediate threat, only scrutiny. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind's mournful cry. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Who was he? A hunter? A trapper? Or something worse? The west was full of shadows, and her vulnerability felt exposed, stark against the unforgiving backdrop. She braced herself, ready to fight or flee, though strength was a luxury she could ill afford. The unknown felt like a physical weight settling over her, heavier than the snow itself. He took a step towards the cabin, deliberate and slow. The man approached the cabin cautiously, his movements economical and silent. He didn't speak, didn't offer greetings, just surveyed the structure, then turned his gaze upon her. His eyes, when she could finally make them out beneath the brim of his fur-lined cap, were the color of a winter creek, hard and assessing, holding a deep, weary knowledge of the wilderness and its indifference. There was no warmth in them, only a jaded observation. He was lean, weathered, and his silence spoke volumes of a life lived in solitude, relying on his own counsel. He wasn't cruel, not overtly, but neither did he radiate kindness. He was simply present, a fact of the landscape like the rocks and the snow. He motioned towards the broken wagon outside with a tilt of his head, then gestured to the cabin. His meaning was clear, you're stranded. He then looked at her, a question in his gaze that wasn't spoken. Alara, her throat dry with fear and cold, managed a hoarse whisper. Wagon. Broke. My man. Went for help. She didn't offer his name. The lie felt brittle on her tongue, but the truth felt too exposed. His expression didn't change. He seemed to weigh her words, not for truthfulness, but for what they implied about her situation. He glanced at the meager supplies visible near the wagon, the single blanket, the empty pack. His gaze returned to her, resting on her thin coat and the desperation etched on her face. He sighed, a quiet sound lost in the wind, and it seemed less a sign of exasperation and more one of grim acceptance. He didn't offer help, not with words. Instead, he turned and walked towards his own shelter, a small, expertly built lean-to nestled against a rock face some distance away, almost invisible in the snow. She watched him go, a strange mix of relief and renewed despair warring within her. He hadn't harmed her, but he hadn't saved her either. He was indifferent. Yet, as he reached his camp, he paused, looked back, and then began to work. He cleared snow, gathered dry wood from a hidden stash, and soon, a thin plume of smoke rose against the gray sky. He was making a fire. For himself, of course. But the scent of wood smoke, however distant, was a powerful lure. After a long moment, he emerged from the lean-to carrying something wrapped in hide. He walked back towards the cabin, stopping short of the entrance. He placed the bundle on the ground, along with a few pieces of dry wood, then backed away slowly. Still no words. Elara waited until he had retreated to his own camp before cautiously approaching the offering. The bundle contained a hunk of dried meat, tough but life-sustaining, and a handful of parched corn. It was a small gesture, grudging perhaps, but it was sustenance. And the wood meant fire, a fragile warmth against the relentless cold. She managed to start a small fire in the cabin's broken hearth, the flames flickering weakly but pushing back the suffocating cold and darkness. She gnawed on the meat, the taste of survival bitter and real. She watched his camp from the cabin, a silent vigil. He was a mystery, a man of the shadows and the wild, who offered help not out of charity, but perhaps some unspoken code or a simple recognition of shared existence in a brutal world. Trust was a plant that grew slowly in this land, nurtured by action, not promises. And his actions, though minimal, had just given her a reprieve. Days turned into a week. The blizzard eventually abated, leaving behind a landscape of dazzling, treacherous white. The man, whom she learned through a single gruff utterance was named Silas, remained a silent, watchful presence. He never stayed long at the cabin, bringing small amounts of food, dried meat, a rabbit he'd snared, melted snow for water, always leaving them outside the door before retreating to his own camp. Their interactions were minimal, often just nods exchanged across the distance. Dialogue was a scarce commodity, each word seemingly weighed and measured before it was spoken. "Need boots," he'd said once, his gaze sharp on her frozen feet. The next day, a pair of worn but serviceable moccasins appeared by the door. "Storm comin'," he'd warned another time, 2 days before the wind howled again. Through his actions, through his quiet efficiency and his evident mastery of the land, a fragile thread of trust began to form. She observed him, her initial fear replaced by cautious respect. He was not a savior, but a pragmatist. He offered what was necessary for survival, no more, no less. There was a deep solitude about him, a weariness that seemed etched into the lines around his eyes. She wondered about his past, what had driven him to this solitary existence. His jadedness wasn't a rejection of her, but a deep-seated resignation towards the world itself. He had seen too much, perhaps, or trusted unwisely in the past. Her own despair had begun to recede, replaced by a stubborn determination to live. She tidied the cabin as best she could, melting snow for washing, exercising her stiff limbs. She was a cowgirl. Resilience was in her blood. This place, this challenge, began to awaken that dormant strength. She started taking small steps outside, staying near the cabin, testing the snow. Silas watched her, his gaze steady and assessing, but he didn't interfere. One evening, as the sky bled twilight colors, she was outside, scraping ice from a small puddle near the cabin when a sound reached her, the distant jingle of harness, the creak of wheels. Her heart leaped. Help? or danger. Silas emerged from his camp, his rifle in hand, his posture alert. He didn't look at her, his focus entirely on the approaching sound. His stillness was unnerving, different from his usual quiet. It was the stillness of a coiled spring. "Stay low," he murmured, the first direct instruction he'd given her. The sound grew louder, accompanied by rough voices. They weren't the voices of neighbors or the law. They sounded hard, predatory. As they came into view, she saw them, 3 men on horseback, rough-looking, armed. They stopped near the broken wagon, their eyes scanning the area. Her blood ran cold. These were not men who offered help. They were scavengers, maybe worse. One of them spotted the smoke from her chimney, thin as it was. A grin spread across his face, ugly and avaricious. "Well, looky here." Someone's holed up, the leader dismounted, beginning to walk towards the cabin. Silas melted back into the shadows near the rocks, becoming one with the landscape. His presence was her only shield, a silent promise of protection against the encroaching threat. She knew, with chilling certainty, that facing these men alone would be impossible. This was the unknown arriving, not as a storm, but as something far more sinister. Her resilience would be tested not just by nature, but by human cruelty. The leader of the men, a broad, scarred man, reached the cabin door, his eyes already calculating. His companions fanned out, their movements casual but alert, like wolves surrounding a flock. Alara stood just inside the doorway, the meager fire flickering behind her, offering little warmth or protection. Her heart hammered, a frantic drum against her ribs, but a core of cold determination solidified within her. She would not crumble. Not now. The man grinned, revealing stained teeth. "Well, look who we found. Little lost lamb, ain't ya?" His gaze swept over her, dismissive and crude. "Where's your man, girlie? Ran off and left ya?" He chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. Before Alara could formulate a response, a voice cut through the tense air. "She's not alone," it was Silas. He emerged from the shadows near the rocks, not stepping fully into the open, but making his presence known. His rifle was held loosely, but his eyes, even from that distance, seemed to bore holes into the leader. The casual predatory air of the men evaporated, replaced by wary surprise. They hadn't expected anyone else. The leader's grin faltered. He looked towards Silas, then back at Alara, assessing the situation. "Who the hell are you?" the leader barked at Silas. Silas didn't answer immediately. He shifted slightly, his stance balanced. Ready. His silence was a weapon, more unnerving than bluster. One of the other men, younger and jumpier, raised his rifle nervously. "Boss, maybe we just move on," the leader swore. He didn't like his prey having protectors. His gaze flicked between Silas and the cabin. He weighed the potential risk against the potential gain. There was no obvious wealth here, just a stranded woman. A man like Silas, blending into the landscape, moving like a shadow, was a dangerous unknown. He was the kind of man who didn't fight fair, who used the land to his advantage. Slowly, grudgingly, the leader backed away from the door. He glared at Silas. "This ain't over," he snarled, though his voice lacked conviction. Silas remained silent, his rifle still. The 3 men exchanged nervous glances. With another string of curses, the leader remounted his horse. His companions followed suit, their movements less confident than before. They rode away, disappearing back into the white vastness from which they came. Alara let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her legs felt weak, but she hadn't collapsed. Silas walked slowly towards the cabin, lowering his rifle. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze meeting hers. For the first time, the jadedness in his eyes seemed tempered by something else, a flicker of acknowledgement, maybe even a hint of respect. "They won't be back tonight," he said, his voice low. It wasn't a question or a promise, just a statement of fact. The shared danger, the moment she stood her ground rather than cowering, had forged a new link between them, stronger than the silent truce they had maintained. He hadn't tamed in the conventional sense, but her quiet resilience, her refusal to be broken by the world's cruelty, had reached him, piercing through his practiced indifference and drawing him out of his solitude, even if only to stand by her side against a common threat. He looked at her, then past her, towards the horizon. Winter's not done, and that wagon ain't moving. He paused, then added, "You can't stay here." It was an invitation, unspoken but clear, an offer to face the unknown together, whatever form it might take. The journey ahead, the challenges of survival, the uncertainty of two solitary souls finding a hesitant connection in a world that demanded strength. Alara looked at the empty tracks of the departed men, at the vast, indifferent landscape, and then at Silas, the silent man who had stood sentinel. She saw not a savior but a partner. Her spirit, once brittle with despair, felt tempered like steel. She had faced abandonment and the wild and human malice, and she had not been broken. Resilience was not the absence of fear, but the action taken despite it. And now she was not alone. "No," she said, her voice clear and steady, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I can't stay here." She stepped out of the cabin, leaving the ghost of her past behind, ready to face the unknown path with the silent, capable man beside her. Two solitary figures finding strength in a fragile, earned partnership.